welcome. How are you, Peter?
I'm good. I'm feeling a little bit low on energy. I have one of those days. I was working really late last night, and it when you kind of exhausted yourself, you've given your all into a video or something like that, and you just don't really get the energy back again when you wake up. That's where I am right now. So if
Caffeine.
caffeine. I need my cup of coffee. How about you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, day off today. It's been a busy week, but just kind of catching up. It's been quite a busy week of flying this week. So 5 full days of flying. I haven't seen a simulator this week. So
Okay.
it's been busy, but good busy.
Good busy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any issues?
I think the main theme of this week, typical kind of Europe, late August, early September, it's thunderstorms. You're just dodging those everywhere you go at the moment, it seems. Speaking to colleagues, everyone's the same. People are diverting. It's just part and parcel of the job. Separate to thunderstorms, actually, just thinking about it, I was flying into Nantes in kind of northwest France on sector 3. So it's a 4 sector day flying in there, and the weather there was a front moving through days ago. Those of you in the UK and Europe will probably remember where the weather really, really changed. And Nantes being kind of on that Atlantic side of France, it was really susceptible to it. And it was, as a front was coming through, the cloud was coming down and the wind was really picking up. And the problem with that was that the wind, we would normally fly an ILS, an instrument landing system, which is the most kind of precise approach we can fly. And the wind was not conducive to that. Typically, we always try and land in a headwind, don't we? It minimizes our ground speed, it reduces the energy of the brakes, our stopping distance, which is great. But we can land with a tailwind. We can land with normally 10 knots of tailwind. And anything longer than that or more than that becomes an issue. So the issue we had on that particular day was the cloud was coming down, so that we would like to fly an approach on the reciprocal runway. So we did have a headwind, but that runway did not have an ILS. Sod's law, or Murphy's law if you're in Ireland. It's just the way it works. So that the cloud was coming down, and we couldn't. We looked at the cloud base, which was about 500 feet above the ground. Yeah, which for an ILS is fine, but we had a non-precision approach on the other end of the runway, and the cloud base, the minima, which is the lowest we can go before we see the runway, that was about 600 feet. So the cloud was 200 feet below lowest we could fly without seeing the ground, which is obviously an issue. So now we're kind of in this position where we want to fly an ILS, but the wind is too strong from the tail. We can't fly into a headwind because we won't see the runway in time. So we get the weather, we end up just entering a hold at 12,000, flight level 120, 12,000 feet, as lots of other aircraft were doing very similar things. We'd planned for it. We had plenty of fuel. We had a plan A, which was getting in there. We had a plan B, which was going to Brest, and a plan C, which was Marseille, or even back to Stansted. So we had plenty of options, and we just sat there. And an aircraft, I think it was an Alitalia, possibly, or maybe an Air France actually, they were the brave ones. They said, well, we're going to give it a go. And they flew this approach, but inevitably ended up going around. So we're like, okay, we'll stay in the hold a bit longer.
So they flew the NDB,
They flew the non-precision. Yeah, it was an RMP approach actually, but the minimum was quite high on that. So yeah, they ended up going back round, entering the hold, and the wind then started to change. We're up there now about 20 minutes. And the wind started to change, and we've got a 15-knot tailwind approval for Nantes because the runway's quite long. There's certain runways that are allowed to have that extra bit of tailwind. So the wind was about a 17-knot tailwind for that approach. So it's out of limits, no chance. And it's rare to kind of find an approach where you're actually landing at 15 knots. Have you ever done any real strong tailwind landings?
Oh yeah, but not at 15 knots. I
No.
don't think, back when I was flying, there was very few runways that actually had 15-knot tailwind approval.
Yeah, it's very few. It's very, very rare. It's rare to, you might have a 5 or maybe 7 or 8 knot tailwind, but it's rare to kind of get it above that 10 knots. Anyway, the wind started to come down right onto that 15-knot limit. So we were like, well, look, we'll give it a go. We had a plan B up our sleeve if it didn't work. We ended up flying this approach, flying this approach. We were coming down. On this ILS now, so we elected for the ILS with the tailwind. So coming down the approach, and to do that, you've got to get the energy under control. because yes, you might be flying, say, 160 knots at 5 miles or 4 miles, but if up at 1,500, 2,000 feet, that tailwind's gonna be a lot stronger than it is on the ground.
Yeah.
So 160 knots, that tailwind could easily be 30 knots. So we're now doing like 195 knots over the ground, sort of 6 or 7 miles away. And just as a kind of put a bit of perspective on that, we have a bit of a guide for particularly for new pilots that we all adhere to. So at 10 miles out, we'd ideally like to be 200 knots indicated, with like at least first stage of flap out, and about 3,000 feet. And at 9 miles, 190 knots, 8 miles, 180 knots, 7 miles, 170. So we're gradually slowing down as we're getting closer. So if you find yourself out now at 5 miles at 160 knots, which is pretty normal, but with a 30 knot tailwind, you're doing over 190 knots at 5 miles away. Things are happening quick. So you've got to spot this. You've got to get your configure a lot earlier. Typically, we'd get the gear down at about 4 or 5 miles. We got the gear out, I think, of 7 or 8 miles.
Yeah.
So we lowered the landing gear, got more flaps out, slowed the speed right back. Because the other issue, the faster your ground speed, the higher the rate of descent you need.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I don't think people understand that what you're saying basically with the tailwind is that you have a much steeper angle that you need to get down.
Yeah,
it's like sitting on one of those, in the children's playground where you go down a slide. It's like that slide becoming steeper and steeper and steeper, and you need to get rid of that energy somehow.
Yeah. So it's the actual slope is the same, but it's because you're going quicker over the ground. You've got to you're going down at a much higher rate of descent.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's a rough half your rate of descent, isn't it? So if you're at 160 knots, you're coming down at half of 16, which is 800 feet a minute. But if you're at 200 knots, you're coming down at over 1,000 feet a minute. So it really does make a difference. And the aircraft don't like to go down and slow down at the same time.
Especially not the 737, and especially not the MAX. Were you in the MAX?
No, it was an NG actually. It was an NG, so it wasn't the MAX. So it did help. But even so, as long as you're thinking about it, as long as you're planning it, it's fine. So we just got the gear out early, more drag, got the flaps out, slowed down, and it was fine. And we landed, and it was a 15 knot tailwind, and we plenty of runway. It was fine. But you've got to be mindful then of brake cooling. The brakes have absorbed a huge amount more energy. Because if you're touching down at 145 knots, where actually the ground speed's 160, which is fast. It's really fast. That's 180 something mile an hour. And you're stopping 60, 65 tons of aircraft. That's a lot of energy. So yeah, you got to think about cooling the brakes. How do we do that? We just have to take the brakes off when we come on stand and just let them cool down. It takes time.
Yep.
But yeah, that was just one sector out of my many I've done that week. 20.
But that's the thing. It takes up a lot of energy, mental energy, to prepare for these kind of things. I mean, obviously on a planning stage, you would have seen that this was the case. For those of you out here listening, the way that we do this on a planning stage when we're at home, even when we're home, but even when we're at the home airport, is that we will look at the current weather situation, and then we will look at things like the wind, see what approaches do we have available to us, what are the minimas on those approaches, and is it likely that we will be able to land? So in this case, like you said, you would have already, when you left, known that this is going to be a potential problem. But again, it would only be a problem to get down there. It would not be a problem to go to your alternate, and the pain in the butt for the people who wants to go to that particular airport. But for us, from a safety perspective, it doesn't really make a difference. We take more fuel and we have more time, and that's it.
And what was interesting, we're listening to all the other aircraft on frequency, it was interesting listening to different airlines' mindsets on this. There was another, I won't mention the airline, but there's another airline. And this, as you said, this is very much forecast. We had very much anticipated this and had planned for it accordingly. But there was an aircraft there, reached the hold, got on frequency, reached the hold. So you could tell they sounded a little bit stressed, and they were like, okay, what's the wind, what's the cloud base, and so on. And then they came back to ATC and said, well, look, if it doesn't increase, or the cloud base doesn't increase, we're going to divert back to the UK. And they said, well, and the ATC said, well, okay, well, how long have you got in the hold before we need to anticipate that? And they went, 2 minutes. And I looked at the FO going, how can you, I mean, the TAF forecast was like a war and peace. It was like, a paragraph of weather.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, how can you rock up to an airport with a paragraph worth of weather, normally, and then have 2 minutes worth of holding fuel? It was bizarre. Yeah. But maybe there's more, I don't know. But
it could be just, the way that they handle that. But it is also important to point out here because as pilots we try to carry as little fuel as we can legally, right? Providing that the weather is good. So if we're flying towards an airport where we are expecting a nice sunny day with low winds and everything, well then we have our minimum fuel, which has our taxi fuel, our trip fuel, our diversion fuel, our minimum reserve, which is an extra 30 minutes at 1500 feet, and our contingency fuel. So it's a lot of fuel, right? The minimum, when we say the minimum fuel, it's still a lot of fuel. And if there's nothing that indicates that you will have any kind of problem landing, you know that you're flying on a filed flight plan, so they're expecting you to come in when you do. But then there's no point in carrying more fuel, because it actually costs fuel to carry fuel. Like if you take fuel with you, it's what, 2.5% per ton per hour or something like that.
Exactly right.
So yeah, some
you still got it.
Some things I do remember. Yeah, but I mean, so that means that out of all of that fuel, if you carry a ton, you're actually wasting 25 kilos of fuel per hour. That just goes out, and 25 kilos, that's half of your car's tank. So if you do a 2-hour trip and you've taken a ton extra fuel for no reason at all, you've actually burned up a full car tank of fuel for no reason whatsoever. So that's why we, as professional pilots, you should be taking as little fuel as possible. But if you do see that there is going to be issues, right, and providing that the airline doesn't want you to just divert immediately for whatever reason, well, then you take as much fuel as you think you'll need. So there's a huge misconception out there, I think, that we're just like, oh, we're just on the limit, and oof, there's no real margins here. There is. There almost always is, especially if the weather is poor.
Yeah, and we're fortunate in the airlines that most major airlines now, and certainly the airline I fly for, as long as if there's a reason to take extra fuel, take it.
Yeah.
As long as there's a reason for it, take it, and if it's sensible, great.
Yeah.
There's no stress from that side, which is great.
But I think because there's been a lot in the press and stuff about these kind of things, and I think at least back when I started, there was a much more relaxed view on carrying extra fuel, and everyone was just carrying extra fuel just for the sake of it. It's nice to have kind of thing. But I, especially given the climate that we live in, the struggles, the environmental struggles that we're facing, of course we shouldn't be burning more fuel for nothing. Like that's part of what we do as pilots, is trying to minimize the impact of air travel.
Yeah, and the hierarchy we always work to is safety, obviously here, and below that, the next one is efficiency.
Yeah.
As long as we've made it safe, then we've got to start thinking about efficiency. And I remember in my first airline, before I joined my current one, you typically go, how much fuel do you like? Okay, we'll take 8 tons. Okay, well, let's take an extra half a kilo for the wife and kids. That was a typical, or for mum and dad,
Yeah. I mean, when I started, everyone was like, it's a nice weather day, so let's plan on landing with 3 tons.
Yeah, that's right.
So you just land on 3 tons, and just for reference, normally the minimum diversion fuel is around 2.1 or something, 2.2,
something like that. Yeah.
So people were like taking 800 kilos just for the sake of it. It's nice to have.
Yeah.
And that might sound logical to everyone who's out there in a car, because a car you typically fuel up, right? Just fill it up, and that's it. And that is because a car in itself is so inefficient that the difference between carrying like a full tank and a half tank is almost negligible. A car burns more fuel than it should all the time, so it doesn't matter. But in an aircraft, which is we talk about not carrying stuff in the galleys because it burns more fuel. Replacing menus because it burns more fuel. Then of course taking a ton extra just for the sake of it is going to make a big difference.
Particularly if you're doing things like 4 or 5 hour flights coming back to Tenerife. You're burning 100, 200 kilos easy. Just from carrying extra fuel.
Exactly. So this is something. It's an interesting discussion to have, and I think people are generally not really understanding how much fuel we're talking about, especially if we're talking about imagine this is one aircraft, but imagine we're talking about an airline that has 200 aircraft that is flying constantly, right? Take those 50 kilos on one flight, and then take that times 400 per day. And now we're starting to see some really, really big figures out there. And this is all part of our job as professional pilots, to make sure that we minimize these kind of things.
Right.
So that's super interesting. Now, I want to, before we go on, I was so irritated this week. so annoyed by the press? I don't know. Can you guess what I'm getting at?
I'm guessing it's something to do with the jamming event with the
Yeah.
president of the European Commission.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm actually creating a full video on this. So
Okay.
when this episode is out, you might already have seen it on Mentor Now. If not, I'm going to do the whole thing, because when I get my blood pumping, I need to make a video and explain things. So just the gist of it was that Ursula von der Leyen, which is the president of the European Commission, was out doing a little bit of a tour over Eastern Europe on the 31st of August this year, and she was flying into Bulgaria, Plovdiv, and when they came in there, the aircraft got jammed, GPS jammed, so the GPS didn't work. And the press, someone took this up. I can't remember if it was the Financial Times. It's one of these papers took it up, and what they wrote was that the president of the European Commission was subjected to GPS jamming, which ended up with the aircraft having to hold or circle the airport for an hour, and then the pilots had to land using paper maps. And it's just like, okay. No, that is just incorrect. Now, obviously, the main part of the story, well, some of it at least, is factually correct, as in there was GPS jamming in the area, and they were subjected to that. But the rest that they kind of emphasized, the holding and circling for an hour and the pilots landing with paper maps, that is all incorrect and deeply misunderstood.
It's typical of it's typical media, isn't it? It's typical general media response to anything aviation related, I find. It's a complete lack of understanding of what the actual issue was and how it was actually dealt with.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, like I said, this will come in its own video, but just the quick kind of answer is that no, they did not circle for an hour. They extended their flight with a full 9 minutes. And that they could have checked just by seeing, what was the expected flight time of this flight, and what was the actual flight time. Now they were delayed with an hour coming out of their origin airport, which is probably why they were also delayed about an hour when they landed.
Cześć. Spróbuję w poniedziałek z drugim menadżerem, pod którym teoretycznie jestem. Zobaczyłem, może po prostu nie zauważy, że te limity zapowiedzieli nie wiadomo tam ile temu. Może mi to zatwierdzi, jak nie, no to lecę na kombinowaniu.
A ty kupiłeś już ten bilet, czy nie?
Jeszcze nie. Bo jak się nie uda, to po prostu polecę w piątek. Patrzyłem, ceny są takie same, jak czwartek i piątek.
Aha, okej. No ja, to może jeden dzień dłużej, nie?
No,
Dobrze, ja wychodzę jeszcze.
dobrze.
I tam na obiad makaron jest, nie wiem, czy widziałeś.
Tak, widziałem, że coś tam jest. Dobra.
Had nothing to do with circling over the airport. Secondary, flying on paper charts, or paper maps, as they said. That projects to the general public two pilots sitting with huge maps in the cockpit, trying to look through the clouds, finding the airport visually. Right? That's what people think of when they hear pilots landed using paper maps. What actually happened, we don't know for sure, but the fact is that some airlines still use paper charts, instrument charts, Jeppesen charts, or whatever other company, Navtec charts, or whatever it might be. These are charts that describes the different approaches that we need to fly, both the arrival routes, the approaches, the ground taxi routes. All of that is on these charts, and they can come either in paper form or in digital form if you have an electronic flight bag. So someone must have looked into the cockpit and seen the pilots looking at these charts and then drawn their own conclusion from that. But in reality, what happens when your GPS jammed is that you go to your backup navigation system, which are ground-based nav aids, which have, are not affected by any way, shape, or form by GPS jamming. So that's what they did. They went into the VOR approach, also the VOR nav aid, which is a very high omnidirectional range.
Very good.
There we go.
2 for 2.
Yeah, that basically just shows like bearings, clear bearings out of that nav aid. they used that. They flew outbound to a specific distance, then they turned in and they intercepted the instrument landing system, which is also ground-based, and they landed. I don't think that the pilots even, if maybe they cursed a little bit when the jamming happened, but their pulse didn't even increase. And it added 9 minutes to their flight time because they had to, instead of flying straight in, they had to go back and fly over the VR and then fly outbound again, which means nothing.
No, it's nothing. And I'm skeptical about the whole paper chart thing anyway, because if you've been jammed, it's the onboard aircraft navigation system, not your charting software, that's been affected.
No, I'm thinking maybe they didn't have electronic flight bag.
Maybe they didn't. Maybe they're still using Jeppesen paper charts, in which case they're used to using it. What it's on is irrelevant anyway. It's just data. We're just looking at a chart. Whether it's on an iPad or whether it's a bit of paper makes no difference. So that's null and void. It's
that's the thing, and of course people might think, well, that's a trivial thing, Petter. Why would you get upset by that? But it all forms a pattern of where the things that are highlighted in the press, and because this was like the highlight of the whole story. When you went in and looked at the headlines, it was like pilots landing using paper maps. And what happens then is that you project an incorrect picture of what we pilots do, about the threats that we face and what the problems actually are, right? So I mean, this is part of why I started Mentor Pilot in the first place, to kind of go out and give an accurate picture of what it is that we do. So even though this was not a big deal, and von der Leyen got there safely and she did what she needed to do and she came back again flying the same aircraft with the same pilots. The issue is not that. The issue is that it's not being depicted correctly.
No, and it's typical press in that you start using vocabulary such as the plane was targeted and disruption, and when you put all of these words with President of the European Commission, it sounds like super dangerous, and obviously it's inferring that it's come from Russia, which it's a good chance it probably has. But I would have been surprised if they flew in there and they didn't get jammed. I've flown into Plovdiv recently. I got jammed.
Yeah.
If I fly to any part of that world, I can't recall a time, I think, where I have not been jammed in the last probably 3 months.
Did you get your paper maps out?
Oh, we had the paper map. We had torches out the window to see the runway. Stopwatches.
Yeah.
It's just part of everyday life when you're flying in that part of the world.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we've talked about what jamming and spoofing of the GPS system actually is in a previous podcast. Please go back and check that if you want. But what's really interesting to me is whether or not things are being done about it.
Yeah, and there is, because what GPS is based fundamentally upon is time. And they have a very accurate clock on board, which is called an atomic clock. And they're really important because aircraft receive this very, very accurate time from GPS. And if that gets disrupted, it can corrupt a lot of issues. And aircraft need to be all using the same time, otherwise things don't work. So they're looking at ways of having separate atomic clocks, portable atomic clocks that aircraft can use, that are all kind of harmonized to the exact same time. You can kind of, and that way it will kind of protect it against these threats. So think of it as like a NordVPN for aircraft. Think of it that way.
Ooh, and that, my friends, is an excellent segue into the sponsor of this episode, which actually is NordVPN. And I am super, super happy to have them on board, because without them, the honest thing is that we wouldn't be able to sit here and do this kind of podcast. So I use them specifically actually when I need to watch hockey, which I love, from Sweden. I wouldn't be able to virtually put my position over to Sweden and access that kind of content if it wasn't for NordVPN. But I know you are using them as well.
Yeah, I'm using it. Mainly if I'm ever out in a hotel somewhere, even UK or abroad, because I know that even with, if I'm not having to use the VPN with their Threat Protection Pro, it still protects you, because as a lot of you know, hotel Wi-Fi is unsecure, it's unprotected. You're very, very vulnerable, as I've first-hand experience with. So for that for me is a big plus. Yeah,
I know, and I mean, Threat Protection Pro, like you said, it works even when the VPN is not engaged. It got a lot of good reviews actually from cybersecurity specialists out there. And what I also find really helpful is that it doesn't affect the internet speed. So whenever I use NordVPN, the speed is super high. They have loads of servers. I think it's 60 different countries, and
Yeah.
they can be used globally. So it's one of those things that I always carry with me when I travel. And if you are interested in doing the same, then please go to nordvpn.com/captain. That's
That wasn't even 50 meters, really.
nordvpn.com/captain. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, then use the QR code that we have somewhere on the screen, and use also the code word captain when you do. That's going to give you 4 extra months for free when you sign up for the 2-year deal, and they always have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you don't really risk anything by trying. And you really, really help the podcast if you use that code, so please do.
Yeah, awesome. And just talking about, you said if you're watching this on YouTube, just a reminder, this is not just on YouTube. In the sense that if you want to watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, it's also on Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcast. So you can go and check them out there.
We should have mentioned that in the very beginning, but if you are watching this on YouTube, which I guess you are, then definitely go and download it on whatever podcast platform that you use normally.
Cool.
Having said that, I want to get to the main story of this episode. Now, half an hour in. And that is that we actually never really finished talking about different types of pilot jobs and job within the aviation industry, because we got a question about that. We started talking a little bit about it, but we kind of misunderstood the question a little bit. I think the person asked, is there anything else than being an airline pilot that you can do with a commercial pilot license, or is there anything else in the aviation industry that you would be doing if you couldn't fly for the airlines? But we also want to go deeper into, if you want to get an airline job and you want to apply for it, then what do you need to think about? And that's really what we want to talk about.
Yeah, how you, if you are getting a job, how you stand out, how you make yourself stand out above others from our perspective of two examiners and instructors. So yeah, just dive into that a little bit. So jobs wise, Petter, what if we go back to the jobs? If we weren't an airline pilot, what other jobs out there are there?
So, I mean, people always think about air traffic control. Of course, it's just a completely separate thing. It doesn't have anything to do with your commercial pilot license, but it's in the aviation industry, and I think it's a very, very stimulating job to do. There's also, outside of being a pilot, things like being an aircraft mechanic, an aircraft engineer seems really fulfilling. But if we're looking at what you can do with your CPL, there are obviously things like, maybe flying for the Coast Guard in your country, maybe going out and doing fire surveillance, doing, to a certain extent, cargo, smaller cargo flights, postal service, working as an instructor.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the most common things that we hear.
Yeah.
There are people who fly sightseeing, bush flights up in Canada, which sounds amazing. Yeah.
I've actually been flying with a few South African pilots, actually recent FOs, and listening to their stories. Because the South Africa is a bit like the States in that it's almost unheard of that you'd come out of flight school and go straight into an airline. You'd come out and build a lot of time in lighter aircraft before you'd get near an airliner. And listening to some of their stories of going on this contract work, so they'll go up into Africa in like Cessna Caravans or Twin Otters and do all this kind of low-level bush flying, landing on dirt strips. They've got to fly down the runway to scare the animals off the runway before they can land. And, people have been shot at, and they've got all these stories. It sounds quite adrenaline-filled. Sounds fun.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying. I flew with someone. You remember there was a TV series called Worst Place to Be a Pilot?
Yeah, they do actually. Yeah.
That was down in Papua New Guinea, I think, somewhere. It was something like that. And I flew with a pilot who used to fly down there for that airline, and they were flying out to these tribes and landing in jungle airports and delivering supplies to tribes that didn't have any other contact with the rest of the world. And it sounded really, really fulfilling. It also sounded incredibly dangerous compared to what we do, as in a completely different world. But what I want to get to is that there's absolutely other types of flying outside of airline flying. And of course, probably the most common question we get is like, okay, do you fly military as well? And I think it's important to understand that there is a big difference between flying civilian and flying military.
Yeah, for sure.
You can transition from one to the other. So a lot of military pilots goes into the civilian airlines eventually. But I always tell people that going into the military and especially becoming a military pilot in order to become a civilian pilot. That's not the way to do it. It's super hard to do. It's like threading to a needle's eye to get into those positions. But also, you should be going into the Air Force because you want to serve your country. You know, because you want to give. It's going to be years, and you're going to be probably contracted to stay, I don't know, 5-10 years in the military, and you need to like that in order for you to do that.
One thing I think that the Americans do very well, though, I was out at the Royal International Air Tattoo this summer and chatting with some of the American pilots out there. There was a C5 Galaxy, and that crew they were very friendly, and just got chatting to them. And they fly for the U.S. Air Force Reserve, so they're civilian pilots that have been contracted. They get trained up, and they have a certain amount of weekends or days a year they have to then go and fly for the United States Air Force. And I thought, God, that would be the perfect job where you're flying airliners, you've got your airline job, but this weekend I'm going off flying F-15s, or I'm going my C5 Galaxy.
I did a video very recently about the Southwest accident that happened. Yeah. And the first officer in that accident actually did fly. He flew F-16s in the reserve, and he had been like, I think the day or 2 days before the accident, he'd been out flying F-16s, and then he jumped into a 737 cockpit, and I thought exactly the same. Like that, that just sounds insanely cool.
It does. Yeah, that kind of ticks every single box in my view. But so there's different ways of going in. I think you have to have quite a clear vision as to what you want to do, what ticks your box. And I know, there's one friend of mine, a colleague I've known for years, going back in like 25 years ago, who got a sponsorship for the airlines, was working with me, and before they joined the airline, realized that actually the airline wasn't for them. They'd done 2 years instructing, and they loved instructing, and the thought of doing 12-hour days in an airliner just didn't seem to resonate with them at all. And they declined the sponsorship, and they paid back what they owed, and they became like a long-term instructor. And I think you've just got to be honest with yourself and work out exactly what appeals to you as an individual.
That goes for anything. You need to always be honest with yourself about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and those things change. As we mentioned in previous episodes, what you want out of life changes as your life progresses.
Yeah.
So
and it takes guts. It takes guts, I think, to admit that. When you've been gearing your whole career to getting into an airline, you go, you know what? Actually, that's not for me now. Takes balls to do that.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is one of those things that we discussed this before as well. That I think a lot of people, when their circumstances change and their priorities change, they end up in a situation where they don't really have the guts to get themselves out of it. And I have always been preaching that if you find, like, unless you are bound to something because you cannot get away from it, like that might be because you have family or debt or whatever, then it's up to you to change your own situation. You are the one who needs to put the foot down and say, no, actually, I wanted to fly like this. I wanted to be a short to medium haul pilot. It worked for me. It doesn't work anymore. I need to change it and change it, because the amount of people out there just sitting and complaining, and you can feel. It pesters everything around you.
It infects you, doesn't it? When you've had a day with someone that's negative and moaning, you come out of there going, oh my God.
Yeah, and you, like, even if you are happy with it, you can sit there, listen to someone who's not happy with their life and kind of ignore it. You think that you can ignore it, but the fact is that you can't. You get out of there with a slightly darker view of your own situation. So this is something, anyone who's listening to this, if you find yourself in a position where you're just not happy, sit down, evaluate why that is, and do something about it.
Yeah, and I was having an interesting chat with a relatively new FO the other day, funny enough, about this. And he was he was finished his training now. He's a fully qualified first officer and been doing it now for 3 or 4 or 5 months. And suddenly when you get a certain amount of hours, other opportunities open up to you. Long haul starts to open up. Other airlines open up. And suddenly I think this dawned on this particular pilot. Oh, I've got all of these options. And he was really kind of coming to me. I got the impression, like, hoping for like an answer. Like you said to me, Ben, what do you think I should do? Do you think I should do this? Do you think I should do that? When is it worth doing the command? So we had a good chat about it. And I sort of said to him, look, you've got to sit down and actually be honest with yourself and go, what kind of gives you that kind of excitement in your your stomach, that kind of real kind of zest kind of for life to kind of go out there and do it? Do you want to go and see the world and fly big jets? If it is, go long haul. If you've got family and you've got people nearby and you want to be at home every night but you want to fly and get loads of experience, then stay short haul. But you've got to be honest with yourself. Don't do what you think society or what you think the coolest thing to do. You've got to be honest with yourself and go, this is actually really what I want to do.
Yeah. No, 100%. Right. And then, like we also mentioned before, make sure that you have, if you do have family and you have your spouse there, make sure that they're behind you, because without that, it's not going to end well.
Nope.
But given that, then if let's say that if we leave the other potential jobs that you could get in aviation, what about applying for that first airline job? How do we actually do that? And also, are there stuff that we should be avoiding? Because there definitely is.
There is, and I know for me personally, when I look back to over 25 years ago, getting the job bit I found the most daunting, because it was everything up to that point I had a form of control over. If I put the work in and I put the effort in, I was assuring myself of success. I was okay, and I kind of stuck to that all the way through my training for the years of training to do, and then you finally get your shiny new commercial pilot's license, your frozen ATPL, and now you can start applying for jobs along with everybody else with a shiny new license. And I found that as like, okay, I'm going to put a submission in, but how do I get mine seen? How do I stand out here amongst this sea of other applications? And it's hard. It's quite daunting, I think. So there's quite a lot to unpack on this.
Yeah, there's no like one size fits all here. You have to, first of all, obviously look at what jobs are you interested in. You should probably start there. So depending on your geographical position or whatever, is there any airline that you would like to work for, to start to kind of assess the market? The worse the market is, the less choice you'll have, and the more it will be just to try to apply for everything. But be honest with yourself. You don't want to apply for something that you don't want to do later on, because you don't want to waste anyone's time.
No.
But then it's just about every airline will have their own application procedure, right? So some airlines will be interested in you as a fresh cadet coming straight out of flight school. Some airlines will not. Some airlines will have requirements of higher education, and some airlines will not. So I always, when people ask me about should I go to college, should I go to university, first of all, I always tend to tell them that if you feel that is a good use of your time, you definitely should. If you feel that you have the economical possibility to do so, but do so with keeping in mind that what you're doing is a backup plan. So if you are going to go into to do university studies, for example, I always tell them, so if you forget about aviation, if you forget about being a pilot, what else would you like to do with your life? So would you like to start a company, but then go through the economics route? Would you like to become a lawyer? Well, then take a law degree, but get a degree in something that you think could be really useful in case you lose your medical license, for example. Because doing that, it means that you now build up a solid plan B, an alternate. And the very few, I don't think I've ever even heard of an airline that requires a specific degree.
No.
They really only they require a degree, and the only reason they're requiring a degree is because that cuts the amount of applications down to a number of people that they know can go through a complicated and hard training process.
Yeah. So, and I think it very much depends on, like you said, your mindset. For me, I was so focused on becoming an airline pilot that a degree, in my view at the time, only delayed that by 3 years with no real gain.
A lot of people think like that.
That was my kind of view at the time, and so I decided not to go down the degree path, and it hasn't had a negative effect on me personally at this stage up to this point. So I'm kind of pleased with that decision, but it's like you said, it's very much down to the individual.
Yeah. So that's one thing. So obviously, if you do want to have the broadest possibility of airlines out there, then yes.
Another lantern. Are you fucking serious? That's gonna be
there's
like...
also now, and this also depends on
I don't know if it's
the
gonna be really
kind of
useful.
cycle where the business is at, because the more pilots they need, the more
Another
they can
airline.
just scrape, take away those kind of requirements, because it has nothing to do with your actual job. It's just a way of shortening the pile.
If anything,
and
they will-
the more
check out
applications they have, the
advantage.
more of those kind of things they pile on. So once you've decided on that or not, then you need to apply to whatever airline that you're interested in, and they will have
Try this.
very specific instructions on their websites. You just go into whatever website it is, you go to careers, you look down to recruitment, you'll find pilot, and in there you're going to find exactly, you're going to need A, B, C, D. And here comes probably one of my biggest advices there. Make sure that you actually fulfill those requirements before you send in an application. That might sound logical, but the fact is that there's a lot of people out there who think, well, I almost fulfill this. I'm going to send in this just in case. And that is probably one of the dumbest things that you can do, because you have to realize that on the other side of that application sits a poor person that needs to go through all of these applications, right? This is an actual person. It might be AI soon, but at the moment there's an actual recruiter that's sitting there and they're going through this. And the last thing they want is to go through something that looks really promising and then get down to the point that says, needs 500 hours, got 350, right? Which means that all of the time that they now spent is wasted, because these requirements are requirements that are stipulated not only by the airline, but often also by insurance company. So this is not like the airline saying, well, we can skip it in your case. No, these are factual minimum requirements that you need to have. And if you have done that and you sent in your application and you have less than, then that recruiter, let's call her Lisa, will remember your name, John. And next time that you come up in that pile with and you actually have the hours, Lisa will remember John, and John's application will fall onto the table. Like, maybe. I'm not saying that it will absolutely happen, but you definitely do not want to put yourself in that side of things from the beginning.
You're not doing yourself any favors at all.
So make sure that that whatever minimum requirements they have, you have. Otherwise, you make sure you get those and then you apply.
Correct.
So what happens next, Ben?
So what happens next? So you've got to somehow
froze
stand
my
out.
previous
You've got to
question.
sound, because everybody, and the hard thing when you're starting out is that everybody starts with the same qualification. You all start with pretty much the same amount of hours, typically, probably a couple of hundred hours, 250 maybe. You've all got the same license, you've got the same qualification. So how does an airline sift through that? And airlines now, they're picking the cream of the crop, because there's a lot of pilots out there that are coming through. There's not so many jobs. So airlines are picking the very top percentage of applicants. And there's a matrix. There'll be a way that the airline values certain criteria. And it could be going right back to day one. It kind of, the work put in your ATPL, your written exams right at the beginning, could now start paying back dividends, because they might go, say for example, the pass rate for the exams are typically 75%. But an airline might go, okay, a bit like what Petter was saying, to minimize a chunk and to get that top, we will only accept people that have a pass of 85% and above. Everybody that's got a pass of 84%, 83%, they're not qualified. And there is a link. They'll see people that struggle and only just get there through their ATPL written exams. There's a link between them struggling in their type rating. And that puts extra demands on the flight, on the training department. It puts extra costs there as well, and it's not fair on the student. So we're not doing anyone any favors by going, oh yeah, we'll just let them in. So put the work in right from day one, because that can pay you back later on.
Absolutely. And now there's always questions coming in around this and saying, well, I failed one of my exams. What's going to happen? Well, the fact is that once you have failed an exam, there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can do is try to do the absolute best you can on the next exam, right? So do not dig yourself in and think this is all over now, because like I said again, it depends a little bit on where you are in the business cycle. They might put it up to 90% at one point, and they might put it down to 75% at one point.
Yeah.
Sometimes they care about first-time passes, sometimes they don't. So you're not out of it, but absolutely try to, when you're setting up your ATPL exams, try to group them, or get your school to help you to group them in a way that you can give the best possibility of getting first-time passes on your ATPL exams.
Yeah,
Because
and
they
if you
do
do,
look at them.
yeah, they do look at them. And if you did have to drop a few, then like Petter said, you got to pick yourself up from that and go, okay, I'm going to smash these I'm going to go and relearn, and I'm going to get 90% on these. So at least when you go to the school, you can turn it into a positive. Go, look, I made a mistake. I didn't put, I took it for granted, but then I worked my ass off, and now I've got 90% passes.
Yeah. So at this first stage, I mean, your airline might require you to put a cover letter in. They might do all kinds of things, and of course, then you just use whatever
Ow!
help you can get to write as
Really?
good of a cover letter as possible.
God damn
Normally,
it.
things that
I'm
stands
gonna
out
get the mono
is
boost.
previous experience that might show
think I
that you're a good
should.
team player, that you have
Okay, that was a nice. Cut
good
that out.
personality skills when it comes to leadership.
Really,
I
I
remember
like this
I was
one. I
asked
didn't
in my
like
interview,
tropics.
for example,
I think-
I used to be a
I don't know about
football,
clean.
referee.
Today.
Right. They thought that was interesting because I started as a 14-year-old being a referee for like men's games, So I was out there telling grown, really, really angry football players what to do and stuff. They thought that was interesting. And so my interview was a lot about football, interestingly enough. And I also played football. So like, okay, so you're a team player. What was your deal in the team? Like those kind of things, they stand out. But you work on whatever experience that you have. Highlight professional experience, especially because they will look at that. But to be perfectly honest, in the first cut, it's normally going to be things like your test scores, first time passes, and things like that. It's really only when you get to the next stage that it starts to become interesting, because they will then call people in for interviews. And here is where it really starts getting interesting.
And it very much depends on the airline and what they're looking for. And this is where, again, the research put in can pay you back now. The work put in, because you've got to forensically research the airline.
How to master this
what I know
vehicle
airlines
again.
is like a generic letter or a generic application or a generic knowledge.
Fucking
They all want to know.
useless.
You need to know everything about
fuck
that
do you
airline.
want?
And when you're applying or when you go into an interview, use
mean,
language
just-
and phrases that they like. And that can differ massively through different airlines, their values. So you go into their About Us section of the website, you scroll down About Us, and it will give you their core values. You can learn about those, and then you can then kind of weave that language and kind of adjust your values to kind of be nicely in line with theirs. So you've got to be sensible with this.
And it kind of makes sense, because what they're doing is they're not hiring a first officer. They're hiring a captain, and they're hiring someone that in hopefully will stay with them until they retire. Right? That's the old values. It doesn't almost never happens in real life, but what they want is that they want to, especially if they're paying for your type rating and things like that, they're going to be investing into you, and they want to see command potential. They want to see that you will fit into the organization, so that when you come in and you work here, you're going to be a nice colleague to work with. We'll get back to that in a second, but what Ben just said is super important. Like you have to know what the fleet plans is. You have to know what kind of aircraft they fly, the destinations. They will ask you, why do you want to work with us? And you need to have some kind of intelligent answer to that. They're also going to ask, there's loads of these standard questions, but there are things like, tell us a time that you did something hard, or tell us when you were in a situation where you needed to use leadership. So it's always good. These kind of things you can find. There are actually great websites out there and great companies that helps you prepare for specific interviews.
Let's go this way.
I never condone preparing for the psychometric tests more than just doing psychometric tests to get used to the procedure. That's great, but don't go in and think that you have learned what a specific test for a specific airline is, because it can really throw you. But you will be having to do psychometric testing, so prepare for that. And like I said, there are companies out there that are great at helping you to steer you.
I didn't notice the time
kind of cases.
It's gonna be.
Yeah. And the thing now that everything's moving towards and has been doing for some time now is, I know, and this is based on another mistake that a lot of pilots can make, is they will frantically be out there looking for what you get in your sim assessment or your selection day, or one of your selection days. They'll be like Googling and looking, speaking to friends and colleagues, what did you get? And then they'll be focused on them optimizing that particular scenario. So you get a sim, say you might get put into a simulator with another candidate, you get airborne, and they're looking now not only at your ability to fly the aeroplane, but actually how you can be a team player. how you can make decisions, how's your situation awareness,
Oh my
how do you
goodness,
manage
this-
workload. And it's very common that they'll gradually up the stress levels, up the workload, to see how you can manage that. And it's all about optimizing that. So a mistake that a lot of pilots make and they'll go, okay, well, the guy yesterday, they got airborne and then they were told that there was I don't know, someone's handbag caught fire from a mobile device in the cabin. And how are they going to manage? What are they going to do? They've now got an emergency. Someone's been burnt. They've got a medical emergency. Where are they going to divert to? The weather here is not very good. So they'll think this through, and they'll plan. This is exactly what I'm going to do. And then they go in their day. It's a completely different scenario. And now they're like, the whole world, their foundation is now falling around them. That's mistake number one. So the way you mitigate that, and it's all about optimizing what we call these core competencies, which the whole of flight training is now based upon. It's the framework foundation of everything pretty much every airline does. It's internationally standardized. Something what I teach a lot in my airline pilot mentor program, and I know that it's taught
I should have went there.
through these selection schools. And it's all about optimize. So if you're given a scenario such as that where you've been told there's a fire on board, then you get told again now someone's seriously burned, and now you're looking at diverting, and now that weather is now below limits. They're adding stress. But if you've got strategies that can manage your workload, reduce your workload, you can delegate, you can make decisions, you can gather information. It doesn't matter what the scenario is. That's the beauty of it. You can now go off and still shine, irrespective of the scenario.
Which is workload management, which is
Yeah.
one of those
Massive.
pillars.
It's a cornerstone of it.
So they will look for those things, which is also why, by the way, it's good to be up on your stick and rudder skills. Obviously,
Yeah.
you're going to want to see that. We're kind of into the simulated part of this of the assessment now. Generally speaking, you will be both doing psychometric testing, an interview, and simulator. The order of these can change, but you'd normally do all three of these things. So you need to pass all of them. And the simulator, absolutely, that's where we might come in. Now, I've never done recruitment, but I've talked to a lot of the recruiters, and obviously both you and I have done work with actually examining the pilots once they get out and into training. So this, like what you're looking for, what you're looking from a cadet is that the ability to be able to take on workload, know when the workload is becoming too high, so delegating, and speaking up and helping. I love seeing how they work in the pilot monitoring role. That actually tells me often quite a lot more than what I see in pilot flying, because most of these comes from flight school. They're quite good when it comes to stick and rudder. They can fly an ILS approach, they can fly a missed approach, they can handle an engine failure. But how you are as a pilot monitoring when the other person is being tested, because normally you'd come in 2 and 2 and do this, and you'll be pilot flying and pilot monitoring, and then it swaps. And I think a lot of people think that it's the pilot flying bit that they're looking at, but I will be looking at the pilot monitoring, because if I see someone that is honestly trying to help, right, I can even see them kind of whispering when they see that the other person is making a mistake. You can kind of see them like pointing down or speed. But they don't want me to hear. They just want them to do well. For me, that is an indication of this is a team player.
Yeah, he's trying to help out.
This person wants the other one to get the job, you know?
Yeah. And I think a big part of this is for all of you listening to this that might be going out for a selection, is to know that it will never be perfect.
Oh.
You will make mistakes.
Oh, absolutely.
Always. So the fundamental thing to remember here is that when you make a mistake, not if, but when you make a mistake, that you're ready for it. It doesn't break you, because that's something that, as an examiner, you will be looking at. How does this person deal with failure, or when things don't go their way? And you've got to be able to manage that and recover, and you can often turn it into a positive.
Absolutely. I mean, and you have been trained with the fundamental of aviation, which is safety, right? So the kind of cornerstone of everything here is that you stay safe. That means that you can fly an ILS approach, you can end up becoming not stabilized on that. But as long as you then decide to go around when you see that you're not stabilized, you're still staying safe.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying that they will still. That they
Okay,
will have.
this is
Depends
this
on
is a
how
good
how
part.
much
Yeah.
you improve. But the fact is that like that's the way I would see
But
it.
that's
You come
that
down,
chain
you make
launcher
a
was
mistake,
really needed,
you
so we
stay
would have
safe
failed
by going around. You
yesterday
don't
either way.
bust the minima or anything like that. You are
Because
doing
we
what
lost
you've been
that
told,
chain launcher
and
early
what
on.
your training has taught you.
Yep. And
Went
the
the
other
other
thing
way
as
for
well
the
is
chest.
having that self-critique and having that ability to apply and learn. And I know from speaking to assessors in other airlines where they will often get you to fly maybe a couple of different scenarios, maybe more than once. And what they're looking for is your trainability. They're looking for your ability to take on information and apply it. So they might say, this is what you're going to do. You go and do it. Maybe it's not great the first time you do it, but you learn from that and then you apply that. And then again, it might not be perfect, but it's going to be better. So they're looking for that trend. And a classic one, for example, for those that have never flown a 737, is that if they're flying an ILS, when they lower the gear and they bring the flaps out to like an intermediate setting, the aircraft really balloons. You get a big increase in lift. And it's very common to see a new pilot kind of get too high on the approach now. And it's quite physical. You've really got to push the control column forward and trim to overcome this. So the first one, it's not uncommon for them to get high on that approach. But then when you do it again, you look, has this person learned that? And if you see now they go gear down, flap 15, and then you see them applying some trim, nose down trim, you're like, okay, they're being receptive to this. And that shows that trainability, because you've got to remember a type rating is a very intense course. There's a lot of workload, and a lot of the workload comes from the individual. The syllabus is there, but you've got to put the time in outside of the actual sim session.
Holy shit, that's actually beautiful.
So they're looking.
Damn.
Those who are watching this on YouTube will see me smiling from ear to ear now. That's just because I like now I really want. Last time you made me want to fly. Now I want to get back into the instructor seat, because this is what it's all about. Like this is the fun part of instructing, and you are not going to think that this is fun during your assessment. That's for sure. But it is really about that. Can you improve? Can you help your colleague? Can you work in a two-pilot environment the way that you've been taught? And this is what we will be looking for sure. Now, in the interview, it's a little bit different, and every airline is going to be slightly different. Again, here's good to compare. So some airlines will have a lot of technical questions. Generally, you're expected to be able to answer questions about the aircraft type that you've done your training in, right? So they will come in and they'll ask you about, I see you flew the Cessna 172 retractable gear here in your CPL. So, can you tell me a little bit about the Fowler flap? Can you tell me a little bit about, the landing gear retraction mechanism and what problems that used to have? So you're expected to know what you've already been learned. For the same reason that Ben just said, they want to see that you have, absorbed knowledge and that you can sustain it. So there will be a lot of that. But generally speaking, I find that the interviewers...
I'm not even gonna use most of my fucking items. Negative row.
They tend to be one personnel, someone from HR.
I was saving it for if I'm gonna get stuck.
Or someone like
Damn, that actually worked out.
The line training captain part
I
of it
go
is
there,
to access.
yeah, I'm just gonna go around.
Is this someone I want to spend 12 hours with?
I didn't even have to use the ferry lantern, I think.
In a high-stress environment.
In a high-stress environment. Do I want to sit with this person, in this kind of environment? So what you want to try to do, I know this is hard, but you want to try to exude a bit of confidence, keep eye contact, smile. If you don't know the answer to a question, you say, I don't know that, I'm going to get back to you with it. Be honest and be transparent. What they don't want to see is someone that is like hyper nervous, and breaks under pressure. And so again, think about it from their point of view. They want a nice colleague. They want someone they can smile with, someone they can take a job.
Basics, oh shit.
Yeah, and don't be surprised. I know in certain parts of the world, having spoken to people directly about this, that you can often get the good cop, bad cop kind of vibe going on with the selection team. And I've heard recently actually of a guy where one of the interviewers was almost personally insulting them to see how they reacted. He said he came out sort of super uncomfortable, but they're looking to see how do you absorb that stress, how do you deal with that kind of stress.
The airline psychologists that did the assessments for the school that I got into, they did that. They were going in, they were probing into what you
and now it's time to eat everything
comfortable with about yourself, and then they would just attack that,
exploit it.
Yeah. So, like, I think I said at some point that I thought maybe they asked like, so how do you think people perceive you when, if, you know, from a negative? Is there anything negative that people might think of you? And I think I said, I remember I was 17 at the time. I think maybe they think I can be like a little bit of a besserwisser, you know, someone who knows, I know
Hello.
basically.
Let's go.
And they
That was
dug
a
into
really good
that.
run.
That was like that. That was just an
Holy
entire
shit.
rest of the interview now. Like, but you're, you know, you think you know everything. You like, they really just like dug into.
How
it.
fast was it actually?
You've got to think.
57, 55. Holy fuck, that was really close.
Interviews was, what was your favourite topic in your ATPLs? And I
Let's
thought,
fucking
I
go.
really like principles
I mean,
of
I
flight. I really
did
like
already
general.
the
So
speedrun
they
act by
launched
cheating,
into
but
a
like,
tirade
hell
of
yeah.
questions on principles of flight and aircraft general.